Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. So here's a question for you. When one country's market success relies almost entirely on a sustained political conflict between two other global powers, how permanent is that shift?
That really is the core issue, isn't it? It hangs over the whole global agricultural trade right now.
Exactly. Today, we're looking closely at this dramatic geopolitical realignment happening in the world of soybeans. Sources are saying Brazil is the new soybean superpower, the indispensable supplier, mainly because of that U.S.-China trade rift. But we want to go beyond just the headline. Is Brazil's new status truly locked in by structural market forces, or is it just riding a very profitable but maybe temporary wave of political trouble?
It's a fascinating case study, really. You see geopolitics, infrastructure spending, harvest cycles, all aligning just perfectly to create, well, maybe a temporary winner at least.
Okay, let's unpack the origin story. We have to start with the main driver. Those U.S.-China trade tensions. Since May, China, the world's biggest soy customer by far, has pretty consistently sidelined U.S. beans. It's retaliation for tariffs.
And you really can't overstate the immediate hit on the American side. For U.S. farmers, particularly across the Midwest, well, it's been financially devastating.
Yeah.
We've seen reports talking about farmers in places like Illinois needing huge federal relief packages just to stay afloat. Their main buyer essentially just vanished.
Painful for them, absolutely. But for Brazil, it's like a gift that keeps giving. And this isn't even the first time, right?
No, exactly. The same thing happened back in 2018 during that first big round of tariffs. Brazil's share of the Chinese market just leaped from roughly half to, three-quarters, almost overnight.
And this current pivot away from the U.S. isn't just talk. The source material says it's real and big.
The numbers bear it out. Brazil is heading for an absolute record export year, could even top 110 million tons by 2025. But the really striking figure is the concentration. China took, get this, 93% of Brazil's exports in September alone.
93%.
Yeah, and they account for about 80% of Brazil's total exports this year.
So normally, a huge bumper harvest in Brazil might actually be a problem, right? It could cause a glut, drop prices.
Exactly. It could depress prices globally.
But instead, this U.S. situation turned that massive harvest into a super profitable stockpile for them. The timing, it couldn't be more perfect for Brazil.
The trade war was definitely the spark, the trigger. But if we stop the analysis there, we miss the bigger picture.
Okay.
What's really crucial is that the political fight acted as an accelerant. It highlighted, and frankly rewarded, the structural advantages Brazil was already quietly building.
Right. That's the key distinction we need to make. It's not just tariffs. There's underlying efficiency, capacity. So what are these structural advantages making Brazil's lead look so strong?
Well, the biggest one, I'd say, is infrastructure. That's the quiet moat being built. For decades, Brazil's big problem was logistics relying too much on long, expensive truck routes to southern ports like Paranaguá.
That was always their weakness compared to the U.S. river system, right? Cheap barges, efficient rail.
Precisely. But that's changing fast. They've been developing what they call the Northern Arc ports, places like Barcarena, Itaqui, Santarém, and coupling that with new rail and waterway projects heading north.
I remember reading about that Northern Arc shift. It was always talked about as the big potential game changer. Is it actually having a major impact now?
Oh, it's dramatic and quantifiable. The volume moving through those northern export routes, it jumped from about 36.7 million tons in 2020 to 57.6 million tons just this year, 2024.
That's a huge increase.
It is. It means Brazilian beans travel less distance overland to get to ships. That fundamentally shrinks their cost disadvantage against the U.S. Midwest. It makes those farms deep in the interior much more competitive globally.
Massive growth in just 4 years. Really shows that infrastructure spending pays off.
Okay, so beyond logistics, Brazil also just has a scale advantage, doesn't it? The U.S. is pretty much maxed out on land.
Exactly right. Brazil's got about 49 million hectares in soy now, but unlike the U.S. Midwest, they still have significant room to expand further into the hinterland. The U.S. just doesn't have that option anymore.
And timing. You mentioned timing is critical in commodities.
Absolutely crucial. Right now, think about it. The U.S. is wrapping up its harvest cycle. American grain bins are full, especially after the corn harvest.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Brazil's enormous crop is just going into the ground now.
Right.
It won't be harvested until January.
So they hit the market just when U.S. supplies are running low.
Precisely. Their harvest lands exactly when the current American supply has been largely shipped out, been spent, as the article puts it. It lets Brazil swoop in and grab that peak global demand when U.S. competition is at its lowest ebb. They fill that seasonal gap perfectly. And there's one more piece in there. The sources mentioned Brazil has a stronger domestic cushion too. Something to stabilize demand if exports dip.
Yeah, that's the biofuel angle. It's basically supportive government policy. Brasilia has pushed forward its domestic biodiesel mandate. It goes to B15, meaning 15% biodiesel blend, in 2025. That's up from B14 now.
So that creates guaranteed demand for soybean oil.
It does. It creates a strong internal pull for soy oil, which supports the price and demand for the whole soybean complex within Brazil. It's like having a built-in customer no matter what happens with exports to Shanghai or elsewhere.
Okay, so when you lay it all out, the trade war gift, the new infrastructure, the sheer scale, the perfect timing, this domestic biofuel floor, it really does paint a picture of, well, almost insurmountable Brazilian dominance, like the birth of a real commodity superpower.
It certainly makes for a very compelling headline, no doubt about it.
But, and here's where we need to dig deeper. We have to challenge those assumptions a bit, right? The ones underpinning this superpower narrative. Because if you look closely, even the sources we have show some cracks in the idea that the U.S. is just permanently retreating.
That critical lens is essential here.
Yeah.
Yes, the immediate situation heavily favors Brazil. But if you start scrutinizing the supposed decline of U.S. agriculture, the numbers, well, they get a bit fuzzier.
Let's start with U.S. acreage. The main article said U.S. planted area dropped 8% since 2017 to 34 million hectares. That sounds pretty bad, like the U.S. farm base is shrinking significantly.
It sounds alarming, yes. But the math there is a bit misleading, actually. We looked at the USDA's own data, the real numbers. They show a smaller decline.
Okay.
In 2017, the U.S. planted 90.2 million acres of soybeans. In 2024, that number was 86.1 million acres.
Okay, so that's a decline, but it's not 8%.
No, it's more like 4.5%. And interestingly, the article's own conversion seems off of down. 34 million hectares is actually closer to 88 million acres, not the 86.1 million the USDA reports. The point is, the difference between an 8% collapse and a 4.5% pullback is pretty significant if you're trying to judge how permanent any U.S. withdrawal from the market is.
Right. It suggests the U.S. might have more capacity to bounce back if, say, the political winds shift. The idea that the U.S. is permanently out seems shakier based on that.
Exactly. That foundation looks less solid when you check the number.
That's a really crucial correction. If the U.S. production base is more robust than the headline suggests, Brazil's long-term lead becomes less certain straight away.
And we also really need to push back on that claim. You hear a lot that Brazil's beans are just flat-out superior quality, usually defined by higher protein content.
Yeah, that comes up often, like it's a long-term, non-political advantage for them.
It sounds simple. More protein, better bean for animal feed. Easy, right?
Seems logical.
If only. It's a classic case of a simple label hiding a more complex technical reality. Look, while some older data, maybe from 2017, showed slightly higher average crude protein in Brazilian beans, that number varies wildly. It depends on the variety, the region, the year, and more importantly, the feed industry doesn't just care about crude protein percentages.
They care about what the animal can actually digest and use.
Exactly right. For pigs and poultry feed, which is where most soy goes, studies often show U.S. soy meal can perform better on digestible amino acids.
Oh.
Think of crude protein like the octane rating of gasoline. Digestible amino acids are like the actual miles per gallon you get. A bean might have slightly lower crude protein, but still deliver more usable nutrition to the animal. So that claimed quality advantage. It's nuanced, definitely not absolute.
So a smart feed formulator looks past the simple protein number, which kind of neutralizes some of that supposed Brazilian quality edge.
It certainly complicates it.
Yeah.
And let's quickly revisit that domestic demand backstop in Brazil. Biofuel mandate.
Right, the B15 starting next year.
Yes, B15 is happening. It's supportive now. But the sources mentioned talk about moving to B16, the next step up. And that path looks, well, uncertain. Officials have already flagged risks about meeting the timeline beyond March 2026.
So biofuel helps, but it's not necessarily a guaranteed escalator of domestic demand forever.
Correct. We can't just assume a straight line of endless growth there. It's policy dependent.
Okay. And while Brazil's focus is heavily on China right now, there's this other big external factor looming, mainly from Europe, this sort of regulatory shadow that poses a unique risk to Brazil, maybe more than the U.S.
That's the EU deforestation regulation, the EUDR. It's definitely an underplayed risk in some narratives.
Explain that again. What does it do?
It's designed to ensure imported stuff, including soybeans, isn't linked to deforestation that happened after 2020. And even if there are reports about implementation delays recently, the pressure to comply is still immense.
And Brazil's exposure here is higher, especially with expansion happening in areas like the Cerrado Savanna.
It is. The Cerrado is vital for Brazil's soy expansion, but it's also a biodiversity hotspot under intense international scrutiny. The EUDR essentially means every Brazilian farmer exporting to Europe, or really any company in a supply chain touching Europe, needs really robust traceability. Auditing systems.
Which adds cost and complexity.
Definitely. It raises costs, operational headaches. It really challenges the idea that just building infrastructure solves all Brazil's problems. It suggests Brazil's heavy reliance on China might partly be a way to avoid these increasingly strict Western environmental rules.
Okay, so we've established the immediate success is largely political fallout, but the long-term foundations seem, well, shakier than the headlines imply. If we zoom out now, what are the biggest future risks that could shuffle this deck again, completely separate from U.S.-China talks?
I think the biggest medium-term risk is actually China itself. Their demand is a double-edged sword.
How so? They need the beans now, desperately.
They do now, but Beijing is pushing hard on a major internal goal: to drastically cut the amount of soy meal used in animal feed.
They want less soy in pig and chicken diets. Why would they do that?
For economic security, food self-sufficiency, they're heavily experimenting with alternative proteins, synthetic amino acids. The goal is to drop soy meal inclusion rates down towards maybe 10% by 2030.
Wow, okay. And if they succeed, even partially,
a durable cut like that could potentially trim something like 10 million tons of yearly soybean imports from the entire global market.
And that hits everyone, including Brazil, which has just ramped up production, assuming China's demand keeps soaring indefinitely.
Exactly. It hurts both the U.S. and Brazil. It poses a fundamental question for Brazil. What if the very market you're fighting tooth and nail to dominate is actually set to shrink significantly over the next 5 years? That challenges the whole premise of their current expansion.
That's a really powerful point of future uncertainty. Okay, so for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this, what are the concrete signals to watch over the next few months? Things that tell us which way this pendulum is really swinging.
Okay, first, keep an eye on that anticipated APEC summit, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting. It's expected late October. Presidents Trump and Xi are expected to meet.
Right.
Any hint of a tariff adjustment, any move to reopen that U.S. corridor to China, that's critical. If a deal seems possible, immediately watch the price spreads between Chicago futures, CBOT, and prices down at Brazil's Paranagua port.
And if that gap narrows sharply, it means U.S. beans are suddenly competitive again.
Precisely. Second, track Brazil's actual export pace in November and December. They're projected to hit that 110 million ton mark for the year. If they fall significantly short, it kind of dampens the superpower claim, shows maybe there are limits to their logistical surge.
Makes sense.
And third, watch for real-world signs of those lower soy diets being adopted in China. Are the big state-owned feed companies making the switch? Or is it just talk? That tells us how realistic that potential 10 million ton import cut really is.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. Here's our final takeaway. That trade war friction. It was probably the best thing that could have happened for Brazilian agriculture recently. It made them the indispensable global supplier, for now.
For now, yeah.
But that dominance is clearly not locked in yet. These slower-burning internal forces like China actively trying to change its feed mix and Europe tightening environmental rules, these are long-term factors that could totally reshuffle the deck later on, regardless of who wins the next tariff fight or who's in the White House.
The current situation is really a political anomaly that Brazil has capitalized on brilliantly, but it doesn't automatically mean it's a permanent market reality. Not yet, anyway.
A perfect reminder that in global trade, perhaps the only constant is that the ground is always shifting beneath your feet. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.